Good morning, everyone. We'll just give colleagues 30 more seconds because quite a few colleagues are coming in, and then we'll start. Yes, good morning. Welcome to this webinar on the role of cities in promoting more just and effective drug policies. My name's Anne Fordham. I'm the Executive Director of the International Drug Policy Consortium, and I'll be your moderator for today. Just a few housekeeping rules before we start. Please do, as some of you already have been, introduce yourselves in the chat. In the chat, we'll also be sharing some links relevant to the discussion. If you have questions, please ask those questions in the Q&A function rather than in the chat. And we'll be encouraging our panelists to respond directly in writing to you where possible, although if there's time, we may lift up a couple of those questions towards the end. And also this webinar will be recorded, so we will be sharing the recording shortly afterwards. So please do share widely with colleagues if you think they will be interested in watching this back. So we're very excited to have this discussion on cities. Lots of interesting developments are happening at the city level, and several initiatives are also in play, which seek to connect cities to each other. But to say a bit more about that, I'm very pleased to introduce Katrin Schiffer. She's the Executive Director of Correlation, the European Harm Reduction Network, and she will really set the scene for the discussion that we have today. So Katrin, you have the floor.
Thanks, Anne, for the introduction. Yeah, also welcome to this webinar. I'm really happy to have you here today. I'm really giving only a very short introduction on the city initiative and also a little bit about the background of this webinar. Cities are at the forefront of when it comes to development and implementation of health, social and drug policies. It is there where we see that problems come up, occur, and it is also there where solutions are being found. And also we see that drug and health policies and laws are being developed at national level. It is the real innovation takes place at local level, which is also very much and very often inspiring for other cities and countries. At the end of 2023, a small group of Correlation members brought up the idea of a city initiative, and we started to discussing the idea, bringing together mayors, local policymakers, communities, and civil society representatives to address local problems and challenges and needs, and also to promote pragmatic, progressive, just, and more effective drug and health policies. With our city initiative, we want to create a kind of platform for exchange, mutual support, and collaboration between cities, and also with civil society and communities. And I think this makes it probably a bit special. We want to be a bottom-up initiative, really practical, building on the cooperation between the communities, civil society, and cities. And we believe that this cooperation is really needed and also beneficial for everyone. And we are also very much keen to cooperate together and closely with other city networks. For example, the Global Commission on Drugs has a city network, Eurocities, and also EFOS, the European Network on Urban Security. There are numerous examples of where cities have acted as catalysts for change. Between the 1970s and 90s, for example, Zurich and Amsterdam were pioneers in developing new drug policies and harm reduction approaches, responding at that time to the dire circumstances and conditions in which people who use drugs were living at that time. Harm reduction services such as needle exchange program, methadone, and also safe consumption rooms were set up and established by civil society and community members. And after a long debate with the cities of Amsterdam and Zurich, they also gained support from them. The establishment of these services have saved thousands of lives, improved the health of people who use drugs, and also created safer cities. What was the reaction of other cities and countries? It was rather negative in the very beginning, and Amsterdam and Zurich were blamed for going too far. However, after a while, results were very positive, and many other cities joined, and nowadays harm reduction is widely acknowledged as one of the most effective drug and health intervention globally. I think this is a powerful example of how cities can drive and catalyze innovation, inspire other cities and countries, and push for more just drug policies. And I think we should keep it in mind when we have this discussion today. We know that the current approach and the war on drugs is not working. And we also know which devastating effect these policies have on the life of people who use drugs and the wider society. And I think challenging the current approach and discussing the development and implementation of more just policies is something which is needed now. And even if the criticism of other countries and cities is loud, we should not stop and give up, because I think it is too much at stake at the moment. Before I give back the word to Anne, I want to give some practical information and also an outlook on the future. This is the first webinar which has been organized as part of the City Initiative. In the forthcoming months, we will organize a series of webinars with other topics and focusing, for example, on open drug scenes, how cities deal with nightlife, with emerging drug trends, and also regulation, decriminalization, and other policy issues will come up. And at the end of the year, this is a real highlight, which some of you might already know, we will organize the European Harm Reduction Conference together with many other partners from 2 to 4 December in Warsaw. On the 4th December, we will organize a panel, hopefully with many mayors and local policy makers, to discuss current challenges. And in the afternoon, the City of Amsterdam will host a satellite event for the whole afternoon as a follow-up of the January conference this year, which was also organized by the City of Amsterdam. And it will focus on regulation and how to pursue for more just and humane drug policy. I'm sure Peter will talk about it later on also a bit. So please block these dates and check our website for more information. I'm giving back the word to Anne.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and really thank you for laying out the importance of cities in leading innovation in drug policies, and the examples of harm reduction from several cities in Western Europe is incredibly pertinent to this conversation, and also sharing a bit about the cities initiatives that are currently happening. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have 3 excellent panelists for you. So first we have Peter Wallinger, who is with the City of Amsterdam, and he's an advisor to Mayor Halsema here in Amsterdam for drug policies. Then we will hear from Alan Casey, who is a councillor with the City of Glasgow, and he's the lead on drug policy for the city. And then finally, we will also hear from Susanna Ronconi, who's a scientific board member with Forum Drog in Italy. So welcome to you 3. The first question that I'd like you to each address in turn, starting with Peter, then Alan, then Susanna, is what role do cities play in the development and implementation of more just and effective drug policies? So first I'll come to you, Peter.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for having us in this webinar. It's a great honor to speak to so many people all over the world, as I see in the chat. And to address your question, I was responsible for organizing the conference that our mayor held in January on the big question that she poses, that if the war on drug is not working, we are winning battles, but we will never win the war if we continue in this direction. then we should discuss other ways of thinking about drug policy, and we should explore the possibilities of regulation in order to not only benefit health issues when it comes to drugs, but also safety issues. And we organized this conference, and well, your question is, what can cities do? Well, one of the things is to talk about this and to make sure that it's not something that is just an intellectual discussion, but that it's also something we should try to explore whether or not it's going to help us in these difficult issues. And Catherine mentioned that at this moment, that in the past, cities have been very important to make change by experimenting and by making it possible to start something that has not been worked out totally, but just because it was needed. And that's what our mayor is aiming to do as well. So she's not just organizing the conference, she also wants us to design blueprints for experiment when it comes to regulation, controlled regulation of drugs. And these blueprints can be something that we can use together as cities to convince each other that something can change and to share knowledge, but we can also convince the international level. And I think that's one of the things that's also very important. If mayors have a role in the cities, they also have a role to show what cities can mean on the international drug policy field. And I would say that our mayor is one of the people who has spoken out on this issue, even though it's very tense, it's very political. But she really wants to make change possible, even though it can take a very long time. Change always takes a long time, but I think that's what cities can do, is start change, talk about it, and make it visible with experiments and showing the possibilities, showing new prospects to drug policy.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Peter. Over to you, Alan, for the same question.
Thank you, and obviously good morning also from Glasgow. It is really great to be here with you all, and I suppose sharing our experience as a city within this context of the UK. And I think the question is really pertinent to the issues that we're facing, because we do operate, and I'm sure others operate, in a really complex legal situation where local politics have certain limitations in terms of how far they can progress policy. But I think cities have got a really important and pivotal place in holding, whether it be central government or indeed more devolved governments, to account for their policy making. And I think cities are absolutely at the forefront of that, and we are doing that currently in Glasgow, and I'll touch upon that in a wee minute. But I suppose, to answer the question directly, I think cities are at the front line of the issue in terms of tackling the problematic drug use. And I think we are the ones who are experiencing the most significant impacts of that drug use on the front line. And I think that's why it's important for us to be using our voice as local leaders in affecting that change. And similar to the City of Amsterdam, we're trying to lead from the front in that in Glasgow, and we've done that for many years. But sadly, Glasgow does have the title of being the drug death capital of Europe, and that's something that we absolutely are trying to change and deliver positive policy that really does make that difference. I think the other thing in terms of cities leading in terms of drug policy creation, each city has its different problems, different demographics, different social issues. And I think when you're trying to tailor policy direction towards those particular issues, that's why cities have to lead from the front. And sometimes national policy making doesn't really cover those local contexts. And I think that's hugely significant. And obviously, one of the things that local government is really good at is local engagement with the public and their citizens in terms of how to bring citizens with us in terms of that progressive policy platform. We're in a very interesting time in Glasgow at this point in time, because we have just won a 5, 6, 7 maybe year fight in terms of trying to open a safe consumption room within the context of the UK. And that's a direct example of how local policy making can really affect change nationally, because we've just been granted permission in Scotland to open the UK's first safe consumption room, and that is quite a significant step forward. That had taken lots of dialogue, lots of discussion, and lots of, I suppose, legal challenge to try and get us to that position. But it shows how local politics and local government can really affect and drive change nationally, because we continue to make the case, and it's difficult for national governments to ignore the evidence base that is in front of them when we're really driving that kind of policy direction forward. But we know that that's not going to be a silver bullet. We need to go much further, and we have been having discussions in our city, and we've taken the formal position, I think the first also in the UK to take the formal position of adopting a decriminalisation policy for all drug use within the city. Now, we can't implement that, but it's a policy direction that we support. Now it's our job to do the same as we did with the Safe Consumption Room and make that case nationally to national government to say this is something that we want to be potentially a pilot area in, to try and really evidence that policies like this work. We know that these policies are enacted in other countries and cities across the world, and I think that's why it's hugely important for us to work in a partnership and a coalition with other organisations. For instance, Correlation mentioned the Global Commission, that we are really involved in their cities initiative, and I think that's why we need to really work in collaboration, make sure we're not duplicating, make sure we're working together in all of this space to try and really influence and implement this positive policy direction that we all want to and we all strive to go forward with.
Thank you so much, Alan, for sharing that, and yeah, really demonstrating how the urgent need in Glasgow has, really mobilized some of these important developments that are happening, and yeah, the idea of cities leading from the front, I think, which is a really important point to reflect on in this discussion. So finally, to you, Susanna, from your perspective from Italy.
You're muted.
Oh, yeah, please unmute.
Sorry, okay. Thank you, Anne, and good morning, everyone. Well, I'm happy to say that something is going on in Italy too. The protagonism of the cities in drug policy is growing quickly. At national level, the birth of the network of Italian cities for an innovative drug policy, the acronym is ELIDE, 2 years ago, has been an important political event and opened a sort of drug policy window in the national political debate. Our current Meloni government drug policy is oriented to criminalization, pathologization, and zero tolerance, a very traditional prohibitionist repertoire, and defines harm reduction as a sort of surrender policy. And in fact, harm reduction is not included in our current national drug policy. The same happens in some regions, which is a problem if you consider that regions are responsible for public health system. But luckily, at the same time, the most important cities from Rome to Torino, Naples, and Milano are intolerant towards any ideological approach which does not support them in governing the drug phenomenon in an effective way. They have been experimenting harm reduction effective interventions for many years, and they don't want to make a step back. They want to defend, but also to develop a pragmatic and rational approach to drug phenomenon. So there is a radical conflict in our country where the city network is the most relevant public and political actor which can adopt a just and effective drug policy. Health services implementation is not within the competence of the cities, it's competence of region, but cities has an open dialogue with the public health system, and they can put on the table the needs of their citizens. Furthermore, for our mayors and city councillors, harm reduction is not only a matter of health services, but a strategic approach to govern the local drug phenomenon. It deals with governing the nightlife in all its social, cultural, and economic aspects, deals with the mediation of conflicts with citizens due to the new open crack scene, deals with orienting police intervention, or again to end any discrimination of people who use drug in assessing social services and benefits. In few words, what is on the table in Italy is the shift towards a social government of the local drug scene. From this perspective, I think that cities can be also the most important barrier to the penal populism which is growing in our society, just supported by the government position. I want to stress that the statement of intent of the city network clearly states that harm reduction is a strategic policy. And I think that it is the real relevant contribution that city can give to a non-ideological national debate. To conclude, I want to mention a fact that happened on the 26th of June, that for our government was the International Day Against Drug, but for the network Elite Cities was the Support Don't Punish Day. They visited the harm reduction facility in every city, and their public message has been in favor of harm reduction and suggested that the goal is not a city without drugs, but a city as a safer setting for users and for citizens.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susanna, for sharing that. And yeah, and also the initiative of the 26th of June and how that day was used to mobilize also in Italy with the cities network. So yeah, on to our second question that I'd like to ask you all to address. And it's really, leading on to what you've already shared, but what can really help cities become the sort of daring experimenters in the field of drug policy reform? What can further catalyze these initiatives that you've been sharing? So Peter, we'll start with you.
I would say that things can catalyze change when it comes to a more humane and a more just drug policy is knowledge, sharing power, and also that there are politicians that are willing to speak out on this. And that's one of well, at least my main challenges at this moment. We're trying to get politicians on board from the cities, like Councillor Ellen Casey, but also like other mayors. At our conference, we had the city of Bern, we had the former mayor of Bogota. And I think one of the things in this discussion is that there is a lot of knowledge, and we can design new policies every day. I can do it, but I'm just a civil servant. What we do need is politicians that are willing to speak out, even though the change will come after they are gone. And that's actually something that appears to be very hard, trying to get politicians on board on this issue. And I think that maybe because it's new, and if something is new, and because it's tense as well, but if something is new, it's very hard to find people in the cities that are working on new drug policies. When it comes to controlled regulation, it's a discussion that is in a way just starting. If you really want to make change, you need to get mayors on board who can be vocal about this, who can be, well, hopefully a group of mayors that are willing to speak to the international level, to their shared national governments, proposing things, trying to experiment together. So if you ask what is the thing that may help cities, is maybe it's a question what can help civil servants in the cities to do their work changing, and that is to have a mayor, and I'm very lucky to have a mayor in this respect. that are saying, well, I want to be outspoken on this. I want this to change. I want you to design experiments. I want you to talk about it. I want you to make a network with other cities, etc., etc. And that is my search for now. And so maybe it's more the question, what can help my city? Well, to have more cities on board.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Peter. And indeed, Mayor Femke Halsema is very outspoken on this issue. And I think, hopefully she's able to convince other mayors to join her in this effort. Yeah. So Alan, yes, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. And I'm probably going to say something quite similar to what Peter has said there. It is hugely important to empower local leaders, and I think that is, because I do really think there is a desire from local leaders and local politicians to really drive and affect that change, and we've seen the evidence of that from the amount of interest that there's been in the various city initiatives that have came forward. There is a lot of interest from cities to be involved in that piece of work. I suppose what is interesting though is having that discussion at a national level, because I think certainly from my experience in Glasgow, we've built a broad cross-party coalition, which is quite unique in some of this space as well, where all of the political parties who operate within our city have all came on board and having the same policy direction when it comes to, for instance, opening the safe consumption room. And that's through local leadership and building that consensus and that coalition. And I suppose the biggest thing here is because it is evidence-based, we can actually demonstrate that these progressive policies actually do make a difference and make a change when it comes to harm reduction, or indeed looking even further than that at decriminalisation or indeed regulation. In terms of what can help cities continue that discussion and that fight, though, I think is having strong leadership at national level government as well, who are willing to empower local government and devolve powers to local government when it comes to really affecting that change. And I think that's a crucial part that's missing, certainly in the context of the UK. The UK government, and we have just had a change in UK government as well, but both parties who represent the two main parties at Westminster in the UK have very similar views when it comes to drug policy. They are very conservative when it comes to that. There doesn't seem to be a desire nationally to change the Misuse of Drugs Act. The war on drugs is always what is being spoken about, and we know, all of us, I think, on this call will know that doesn't work. It's failed. It's never worked. And I think we really need to be starting to have those discussions at a more national level, and I suppose demonstrate and give confidence to national governments that cities actually know what we're doing. We know how to enact and look at pilot projects and I suppose do things that are a bit more experimental and a bit more forward progressive thinking. And I think we just need to do more to convince national government that's the case. How we do that is by building broad coalitions with other cities who are much further down the line when it comes to progressive policies, but those cities are also willing to learn in terms of what we're doing differently in our cities. As I say, building that coalition, I think will be really and hugely important, and that is on a global scale. Now, each country works in its own confines within its own laws and all of that, but we can have a general consensus in terms of the direction of travel that we want to go. And I think cities showing leadership in that space is hugely, hugely important. And as I say, think locally, but act globally. And I think that's a huge, important thing that we need to do. And I know it's a cliche kind of statement to make, but it's how we make really, really radical approaches to this policy making. And as I say, Glasgow are willing to take its place in that, and I'm very vocal locally in progressive drug policy as a local leader. We all have to do the same. We all have to step up and make that case.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's over to you, Susanna.
Yes, also in my opinion, networking is absolutely important, also at national level, because I think that if the most important city can speak with one voice, this is very powerful, and is also a matter of visibility and can have an impact on the political debate at national level in a very strong way. And also synergy between cities means sharing experience, competence, and project. And is in our national context, networking is also an important opportunity for smaller towns, and you know, our country is the country of small towns, and the smaller towns would not have enough resources and competence to innovate their local drug policy, but being inside the network could help them to do that. But networking is important also, as you said, at the international and European level, in order to learning from each other and gain much more power and voice in the European and global drug policy. In this perspective, I really think that we need a new network, international network, something like I'm old enough to remember the Frankfurt conference, so I think that perhaps we would need a new Frankfurt conference updated to the new century. But I think that there are other two factors that could support innovation, city innovation in drug policy. The first is a strong alliance and collaboration with the civil society organization, but also with professional networks. In Italy, the network of a civil society organization for drug policy reform have given a strong push to the birth of a city network. And today we have a double role that is a political one and scientific one. I make an example. In Italy, we have no drug consumption rooms due to several governments' ideological opposition. But today, thanks to the network ELIDE, city as Torino, Napoli, and Bologna declared their will to introduce drug consumption room to cope with the new open drug scene impact. Well, we are created a scientific committee, and we are giving them strong support with information and evidence and every scientific tools that can help cities in designing an effective protocol to start with this experimentation. The second factor I see as important is to create a social consensus around the innovative drug policy in our cities. The support by people is a crucial factor, in my opinion, and the cities must invest on that. They must invest on social communication. There are a lot of opportunities in our city to meet people, to listen to them, and to talk to them. And my experience is that when you talk in a clear and honest way, people do understand what you are saying, and it is not so difficult to have their support. So I think that is important if local administrators are able to speak in a clear way, making explain the difference between an ineffective rhetoric of eliminating drugs, eliminating drug users, and eliminating drug dealers from the street of our cities, from this and a pragmatic and honest policy aimed at managing and governing the drug scene. So networking, of course, collaboration with the civil society, but also work on toward a social consensus to new policies.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these responses, and yeah, some very clear ideas on, you know, what would really help to catalyze the work that you're doing at the city level. I think all of you have really mentioned the importance of cities working together, you know, finding a way for cities to work in coalition. Yeah, I think we still have around, just over 10 minutes for some further discussion here. And maybe you would like to reflect on something that some of the other panelists have said. I mean, for example, are there, Susanna, you raised this really interesting idea of the city network within Italy. That is taking quite a progressive position. What are the possibilities for that, say, in the UK or also in the Netherlands? Maybe Alan and Peter, you want to also share and also reflect on anything else that has come up. And there is one question in the Q&A, which maybe you can also answer in this round about like, how can other cities really get involved with some of the work that you're leading on?
In terms of the UK, obviously, as a city government, we're involved in many different networks for different policy areas, and that's something that we really they do take an active role in. I don't believe that there is a similar platform when it comes to progressive drug policy within UK local authorities, though, to have that local city network across the UK. Somewhere where we've been doing a little piece of work on this is working with other cities in the UK to evidence-base the idea of opening safe consumption rooms in the UK, because obviously we are leading the way in that. Lots of other cities in the UK are really interested in following in our footsteps, which is really positive and really good. So we've been meeting cities quite regularly now. Even just tomorrow, we have Belfast, a delegation from Belfast coming to Glasgow to look at all of the harm reduction interventions that we make in the city, and also to visit our enhanced drug treatment service, and indeed where we're going to be opening the safe consumption room. So we are trying to kind of lead that way, but I don't believe that it's formalised in the same way as Susanna has mentioned potentially in Italy, and I think there's room for us to do that. I suppose what we're doing is trying to kind of do that on a more global basis, or work with the Global Commission, for instance, and obviously we're working with yourselves today. I think it's trying to kind of expand that as much as possible, and I know that there is other UK cities who are working with us on that and who are interested in taking part in a leading role in some of the kind of policy areas. So I think that is hugely important. In terms of advice to other cities who are interested, I think just reach out to the organisations who are represented here in other cities as well and ask them what they're doing. And certainly we are always willing to work and collaborate with any city who is willing to kind of do more positive and progressive drug policy, because we can absolutely learn from each other in that space.
Thanks, Alan. Peter? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Susanna.
No, thank you. No, with regard to the involvement of a new city in the network, I want to stress that Italian city arrived very late, because we have been working to have a city network for many years. It's a very long process, but I think that there are two different levels to involve the city now. The first is the local level. The relationship with the harm reduction professional, with the organization of people who use drug, with civil society organization. So it's important, the dialogue between all of us and the local administration. And on the other side, what we are seeing in Italy is the importance of a sort of a snowball among mayors and or city councilor or of assessors, so at their level. So it's important in this direction that the network is visible, make a public statement and promote places where to discuss and share ideas. But it's important to maintain both the level, the local one and the collaboration among the civil society organization, and the level of exchange among local administrators, I think.
Thank you, Susanna. Peter?
To be short, in the Netherlands, the situation is very divided when it comes to the question of controlled regulation of drugs, because it's such a political discussion. So it's quite hard to find cities on board. Some cities will be on the same page as my mayor, some others are opposed of it. Then again, there's a lot of knowledge shared between cities when it comes to harm reduction best practices. So there is a lot of common ground on progressive drugs policies on that side. And we try to share knowledge, we try to meet now and then, but there's no official cities network in the Netherlands. And one thing that I would like to explore is how we could influence the national governments by connecting the cities to the international networks. And I can imagine that national politicians and national ministers can be influenced when they see that some cities in their countries are thinking the same way about new drug policies, and that also there's an international trend. And that's what's actually happening right now when it comes to controlled regulation. The High Commissioner of Human Rights has stated very clearly that we need to find out other ways to fight the war on drugs. We need to find out if controlled regulation could be a solution for this war on drugs. And that's what we are aiming to do in Warsaw on the 4th of December, adjacent to the conference on harm reduction, trying to connect those two. Trying to get people from the UN on board, trying to reach out for the High Commissioner of Human Rights to speak, if possible, at this conference, or someone else from the UN, to speak with mayors that have the same issues that they are addressing on the international level and trying to connect them. And I think that can have an enormous influence when it's made visible on the national governments that we're all struggling with in our own ways.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much, Peter, for sharing this. And I think, it's very clear that, ultimately there needs to be a sort of bottom-up influencing that happens from city level to the national government level to the UN level in a way, but it's sort of circular, right? Because as you mentioned, there is increasing commentary coming from particularly the UN human rights system that is pointing to the need for a big shift in drug policies from a human rights perspective, given that the war on drugs has had very significant and disastrous impacts for the outcome for the right to health, for example, in particular, but a whole raft of human rights violations relating to that. So I think it would be, you raise a really important point. There is a specific question in the Q&A, which I think also perhaps lends itself to this collaboration between cities, and maybe coming first to you, Alan, around the progress that you've made. I think from a very worrying situation in Glasgow to be able to open the UK's first drug consumption room there. But how did that happen? How were you able to convince decision makers that the importance of having such a facility in Glasgow, and that, to answer the question, that this was not about enabling drug consumption?
Yeah, and I think it's a very pertinent question, because we're actually having those discussions still at this point, despite providing a wealth of evidence to the contrary that doesn't actually promote drug use. I think in terms of our journey, we had quite a significant outbreak of HIV back in probably about 10 years ago, and we did a health needs assessment in the city which recognised the significant public health issue that we were facing, in fact, the public health emergency that we were facing. One of the main recommendations that came from that health needs report was that opening a safe consumption room and creating a safe, dignified space for folk who are publicly injecting would massively change the kind of the issues that those in that community were facing. From that point in time, what we then did was we looked at best practice across the world in terms of drug consumptions, and really pulled together a very, very detailed evidence-based kind of policy direction that we then had taken to both the devolved government in Scotland and indeed national government in the UK. Now, as I say, that took maybe 4 or 5 years to start that real detailed conversation and convincing national government about the positive difference that a safe consumption room can make. But we had to continually make that case, and indeed taking the intervention of the Scottish Government to say that the Scottish Government were quite on board with it actually, and recognised that that was a positive way forward. The difficulty was that the Misuse of Drugs Act is reserved to UK Parliament. We had to convince UK Government. We found, I don't want to call it a loophole, but we have a different legal system in Scotland, and that's how we've managed to kind of get around the issue with the UK reserve policy. The UK Government have still been hostile to us opening, but they recognise the local context in terms of how that is going to be operating. But I think to answer the direct question in the Q&A, how do we demonstrate that it doesn't promote drug use or anything like that? I think what you have to do first of all is just recognise that drug use is pertinent and prevalent in those areas, and that's the whole reason why you're opening a safe consumption room. You're not opening it to promote or encourage drug use there. You're opening it because it's already a huge, significant problem, and that is the first of all. You have to make that recognition and make sure that national politicians have that recognition that actually it's a problem already, and that's the solution to try and address that problem and try and get people into proper treatment and give them a dignified approach to drug services.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. Peter and Susanna, do you want to come in on this question at all?
I only want to add that when we tried to open the first drug consumption room in Torino about 12 years ago, but we were not successful. But we tried also to have the support of the citizens. And this was important. We collect thousands of signs, collecting signs on the street, and it was very interesting. So I think that we can also consider beyond evidence, beyond everything, also consider the possibility to be supported by citizens, because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susanna. That's critical, I think. Peter?
Well, more or less the same, but people are always very afraid of things that are going to happen. And when you just start it and have some guts and have a mayor on board, saying it again, but have someone on board who is saying, well, I'm going to take this risk because I'm convinced that it's a better way to do it. Then you can show it. And that's one of the most tough things we have to do from the city's perspective is to convince national governments who are not dealing with the problems in the streets themselves to change the law. And to change laws is taking a long time, and it's often not that urgent for the politicians on the national government. So if things are being done, if people are having some guts to just try it or just to show how it could be done, that might change the world slowly, but surely.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all three of you. I think it's been, really interesting to hear from your perspectives and experience, and also your ambition around the role that cities must and should continue to play. As I think Alan said, to those colleagues who are interested in how cities can get involved, I think there are several different initiatives, but clearly working together as we are on this webinar together in terms of the work of the Global Commission, the City of Amsterdam, and also Correlations City Network. So thank you so much to all three of you. Peter, did you want to have a final word?
One last thing, we have made a manifesto and it's shared in the link, so I think you can all see it, but it shortly states what has been spoken about at the conference in Amsterdam. I would like to ask everyone to get to know this manifesto and try to share it or endorse it. So just the last thing I forgot to say at the beginning.
Yes, thank you so much, Peter. So now we will move to the closing remarks and reflections. And I'm very delighted that we have with us today Pavel Bem. Pavel is with the Global Commission on Drug Policy that we've mentioned a few times, and he's also the former mayor of the city of Prague. So Pavel, I'd like to give you the floor, just to reflect on what has been shared today and also share a little about the work of the Global Commission with respect to the Cities Initiative. Thank you.
Good morning to everybody, and thanks, Anne. Thanks first you to all of the speakers for your inspiring contributions. And many thanks also to our hosts, the Correlation European Harm Reduction Network, the City of Amsterdam, the International Drug Policy Consortium, and Transform Drug Policy Foundation for welcoming us here today. And thanks to everyone for joining. I think all of us can agree then, and as speakers have made explicitly clear, drug policy reform action at the city level is essential for implementation of human rights and health-centered drug policies, and at the same time can have a huge impact at not only city levels, but also at national and international ones. Local governments are closest to the reality of what is happening on the ground. They are well placed to address the root causes of the problem, mainly the unintended negative consequences of drug prohibition and the so-called war on drugs in our communities. Cities play a major role in initiating drug policy changes and implementing them in their local contexts. It's also vital to stress the importance of dialogue and cooperation among all levels of government, as we've heard today many times, as well as a meaningful interaction and cooperation with the civil society and communities of people who use drugs, in order to develop effective drug policies that are grounded on human rights and reflect the contextual situation of any given location. Respecting human rights and promoting health, from my perspective, are key elements of coherent drug policies. The Global Commission on Drug Policy remains firmly committed to supporting efforts at all levels to achieve the necessary reforms that we are calling for at the international as well as national and local levels. Since its inception, the Global Commission has consistently been advocating for the importance of supporting local drug policy reform, taking into account health, human rights, and also safety considerations. We have held a number of consultations with local governments in various cities: Geneva, Glasgow, London, Lisbon, Amsterdam. And in 2021, the Global Commission published the Drug Policy and City Government Position Paper, which included 4 main recommendations to cities and municipalities. First, design and implement local drug policies that put health and safety first. Secondly, ensure that local drug policies are coherent and provide a platform to include everyone involved. Then ensure that local drug policies focus on reducing violence generated by illegal drug markets to achieve peaceful cities for all. Finally, take control of local drug markets by legally regulating access to current illegal drugs. Indeed, there are lots of interesting lessons and experiences to share between cities at the different stages of the drug reform spectrum, as we have just heard from the panelists today. And indeed, similar illustrations were also shared at an event entitled Advancing Drug Policy Reform at the Local Level that the Global Commission organized together with Global Cities Hub and UN Habitat in Geneva just 2 weeks ago. The Global Commission is firmly convinced that there is an enormous potential to work in this area. We are all aware that no size fits all, and this is why we have been steadily creating a convening space for cities and developing a city strategy for drug policy reform. The strategy aims to guide local authorities in their drug policy reform actions to provide a way for cities to exchange experiences, best practices, and learn from each other, and to build and use evidence to advance drug policy reform at local levels around the world. If I may conclude, I'm sure that this session will encourage us to increase our efforts to improve drug policy at all levels, local, national, international, with an emphasis here today on what can be done locally. From my experience as the National Drug Coordinator in the Czech Republic in the 90s, and as well as from my time as mayor of the city of Prague later, I am well aware of how important, influential, powerful this local action can be. The major question is, what is the key role of the cities in drug policy reform? And I would like to highlight some of key messages which I have heard from our distinguished speakers, and sorry for simplification. I start with Peter. I just really enjoyed the simple sentence to start change towards more human drug policies based on decriminalization and regulation. Well, Alan Casey raised the question, how far can cities progress the policy reform? And as we see and as we've heard today, very far based on the Glasgow experience. So congratulations. And finally, Susanna Roncone stressed the pragmatic and rational approach. And she pointed out that the aim is to end any discrimination. And I really love most of all the statement that the cities represents the most important barrier to penal populism. So many thanks for that. And finally, I see that there is a strength in solidarity, and we cannot fulfill this task in drug policy reform alone. It's crucial to work together with partners to ensure that effective strategies are utilized to their fullest. So thank you for inviting me to participate at this webinar, and I wish you a good day and the rest of the summer. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pavel, for your remarks and thoughtful reflections, for the discussion and the encouragement, obviously, for the work to continue at the city level. I think we've really heard about the importance of cities working together. I liked your final comment about, strength in solidarity, which I think is critical as, for many of us working at all different levels as we try to tear down the wall of prohibition, find sustainable alternatives to the war on drugs, and really, encourage colleagues on the call who are working at the city level. Really, the idea that Alan shared of leading from the front at city level, I think is also critical. People working at the city level, you're seeing the problems really at a really granular level, and being able to share that and reflect that to policymakers working at the national and international level will be of critical importance. Of course, from my own perspective, IDPC stands ready to make those connections and support you in that work as well. But a final thank you to all of our co-hosts, to the panelists, and also to Pavel as well for these final concluding remarks. And thank you all for being with us, and please do share the recording widely when it is available. So with that, I'll close the webinar. Thank you.